This video tutorial looks at Scratch game creation. It will guide you through the steps required to create a simple Pong game. Please follow through it at your own pace and pause when necessary. The tutorial looks at skills such as keyboard interaction, randomization, conditional statements, collision sensing, and resetting. You may have looked at some of these skills before, but this tutorial will show you how to make them all work together. For those of you not familiar with Pong, it is a simple tennis game. It was one of the first video games ever created. If you look at the picture now as a bird's eye view of a tennis court, we've got player 1 on the left hand side, player 2 on the right hand side, the net in the middle, and this dot here is the ball. The ball goes back and forth between the players who have to make sure that they hit it with a little paddle on each side. If they hit the ball with the paddle, it bounces off towards the other player who has to move their paddle up and down to hit the ball back. And we repeat until someone misses and then they lose that turn. So let's get started and try to create our own Pong game. First thing we need to do is to open up Scratch with a fresh new document. And what I'd like to do first is to set up our sprites. So we'll need a few sprites here. There'll be the tennis ball that'll float back and forth between the two players. There'll be the Pong button on each side for the players. And we're also going to create some boundaries. And these will act as the sides of the game. So if the ball misses one of the buttons and hits the side, then we'll know that a collision has occurred and that the turn has been lost. So we'll start by opening an existing sprite. In the Things section, we'll start with the basketball and we'll turn this into a tennis ball. So we've got the basketball in there now. We can go into costumes and edit the basketball. So the first thing we'll do is remove the basketball lines. Use the paintbrush for that and the color selection tool. So we'll select the orange, maybe a bigger brush, and we'll just paint away those lines. Now back to a smaller brush. We'll bucket fill the basketball with a bit more of a tennis ball colour, so we'll make it a yellow. We'll go back to black, paintbrush, as I said, with a smaller size, and we can turn this into a tennis ball. There we go, easy as that. We'll click OK, so that costume is saved, and there we go, we've got our tennis ball. We won't be needing the original sprite, so we can right click on that one and delete that for now. So the next thing we'll do is to create our paddle sprite, so clicking on New Sprite. This one simply needs to be a line, and we can make it black. Let's make sure it's straight. Click OK, and there we have it. Separate those out so we can see them. And we'll need a second copy of that for the other player, so we can right click on that and click duplicate. So there we have it, beginnings of our game. Got two players and we've got a tennis ball. So as I said, the next thing we'll make will be our collision sides. So I want to make a red line. And for this one I'm using the top red. Make note of that because later on we'll be using a different red. So quite a long line for this one. so it needs to cover the whole stage. There we have it. We can move that into place on the very side. Again, we can make a copy of that. Put one on the other side. So we've got our boundary. Now this second one, if we go into the costumes, we'll edit that. Just get the bucket fill and change that to the slightly darker red. The reason for that is that we want to know which side of the stage the ball has hit, because we'll therefore know which player has missed the ball and therefore the other player has won. So when we're doing our collision sensing later on, those two colours will be able to distinguish between the left side and the right side of the stage. Now another thing we need to do here is to make the ball a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit out of proportion. So if we right click on the tennis ball and click resize this sprite and just shrink it till it's a suitable size. Now we've got all our sprites set up and in position. Now we can start putting in our scripts. So this first script will be applied to the ball. So we'll make sure that's selected. Go to the Scripts tab and we can start scripting here. So the first thing we want to do is to make the ball shoot off in a random direction, whether it's left or right. We don't want it being the same every time, so it'll get a little bit boring. So first thing we're doing is making it move, so we're going into motion and we'll choose point in direction and then into operators. As I said, we're making it random, so we'll click on pick random, pop that into the box there. And we can put in our two figures here. Now we're going to have -90 to 90. The reason for that is simply if we think about the degrees, it'll shoot the ball anywhere from -90 degrees, which will be straight to the left, all the way to +90 degrees, which is straight to the right. So the ball will start going in an upwards direction, but towards either player anywhere in between. The next thing we need to do is to set up the collision detection. So because we want that to be an ongoing thing, we'll go into control and we'll pick forever. So we've got this in a forever loop. And we will then have an if-else statement. So forever, if, in here we'll select that the ball is hitting a certain color, then we need to know what happens. So forever if sensing, forever if this sprite is sensing that it's touching, oops, sorry, I selected the wrong one there. Forever if this sprite is touching color, and we'll select the red on the left hand side. What do we want it to do? Well, if the ball hits the left hand side here, we know player 1 has lost and therefore player 2 has won. So what we can tell it to do is to say player 2 has won. Now in this case, that'll be the end of the game. You can change that to try and include some scoring, but for now we'll wait a moment before we end it all so that message stays on the screen for a little while. So we'll say maybe wait 8 seconds and then we're going to stop. Now that completes the if statement, but What if it doesn't hit? If the ball isn't touching red, well, the other thing we want it to do, another if else, if it's touching the other red. So sensing, touching colour, we can select that other red and repeat the same thing in this box. So in this case it would be player 1 wins, wait 8 seconds and stop. Okay, so we've got some conditional statements there that will tell us what happens if the ball hits the left or the right side of the stage, but we also need it to do something if it hits the top or the bottom of the stage. So that's quite simple. All that needs to happen there is that it would need to bounce. So if on edge, bounce, and we know that's not going to happen on the left or the right because it'll satisfy one of the other two conditions before it ever gets to being on the edge if it hits the left or the right. So this will only work for the top and the bottom. And then we're going to put in a move steps option. Now what this will do is simply move the ball. So whatever the direction it's been set in previously, whether we've bounced it off the edge or we've set it at the random direction at the beginning, this will move the ball 5 steps in that direction. This is how we can change the speed of the game as well. So if we make it less, it'll move slower. If we make it higher, it'll move faster. Now we need another if statement. So we need to know what will happen if the ball hits one of the paddles. So we'll add in another if. Now we don't need this one to be an if else because all other possible things have already been covered. There's only certain things that the ball can hit. It can hit the top or the bottom, so we've got it to bounce. You can hit the left or the right, so we've got each winner winning on that case. And now we're saying what happens if it hits the paddles. So we'll go back into sensing, and again we're using the touch color sensor, and this will be black, the same color as the paddles. Now if it hits black, we want it to move, so back into motion. We want it to bounce back in a different direction, so we will choose point in direction. And for this one we want it to be a little bit random, so we're going to use a couple of operators. The first is the plus operator, and inside that we're going to use one minus operator, and one pick random operator. So in the minus one, the first thing we'll want to do is type in 360, and that's so it turns around, it does a complete 360, but minus the direction that it's already going in. So back into motion, and we'll put direction in that second one. So that'll effectively turn the ball around, but we don't want it to be quite that simple. We could end up in a bit of a loop there where it goes back and forth in the exact same direction. So we want to make that a little bit random. So that's why we've got the pick random option. So this will change the degree that the ball turns back in by between 5 and -5. So there's our code for the ball. That does everything that we need it to do for the game. One last thing is that when the game's over, we need a way for the ball to go back to the middle so we can start again. So all we do is at the very top of our program, we just need to set the X and Y coordinates. So in motion we choose go to X 0 and Y 0 being the center of our stage. And in control, obviously we need the flag to get everything going. And that controls our ball. So we can have a quick look at that and see what the ball does. You can see it shoots off. It hit the right edge, so we know that player 1 wins. Try that again. And this time we can see that it's bouncing back and forth at slightly random angles. And now player 2 will win. And now all that's left to do is to move our players up and down so we can actually play the game. Now in this case I'm going to split the keyboard in two and have one player on each side. So player 1 will use Q and A for up and down, whereas player 2 will use P and L. So we'll start by selecting player 1, which in this case is sprite 3, and we'll go to the motion section. And the first thing I want to do is, as with the ball, is we need to reset the position. So when the game resets, the sprite returns to its original position. So we'll set the Y to 0. And now we need a forever if statement, because we want this to continue while the whole game is running. And a sensing option here for if a key is pressed. So we want if Q is pressed, then we want the Y axis, so that's the up and down one, to change, and we want it to increase, to go up. So we'll say to go up by 5. But we don't want it to go off the screen, so if on edge, bounce back. And we need that to happen when the flag is pressed. And we need the same thing to happen for going down. On this one we don't need to set the Y position again because we've already reset that at the top. So we can go straight to a forever if, key pressed, and in this case it's the letter A, motion, change Y by -5, so it goes down, and again if it hits the bottom we want it to bounce back. And if we test that out, now we can control player 1, so it's only fair that we do the same to player 2. So again we're going to reset, set Y position to 0, put in a forever if, both up and down, keyboard sensing for P to go up and L to go down. Back to motion, I want Y to change by 5 and -5. And again to bounce on the edge. And there we have it. Our game is complete. Oh, missed him. Player 2 wins. Let's try again. There you have it, a simple Pong game. So now you can try a few things to enhance the game if you like, perhaps make a better background, introduce some scoring, and see where you can take it. And that's all for this little tutorial. Thank you very much. Bye.